money. So turning to Captain Hood, as a pilot, you've had decades making decisions using solid data and sound reasoning, sound logical reasoning, otherwise people die. You have in recent years travelled across Australia listening personally to thousands and thousands of Australians.
Yes, sir.
And I've watched the response of Australians to you. They come to you and just bare their souls.
Yep.
You've received a lot. And you've broadcasted to millions of Australians. So I have two questions of you initially. As a pilot, how do you think that CASA has handled this, particularly in blindly condoning a novel, new, unproven experimental gene therapy-based treatment that did not complete American testing and which, according to the TGA, was not tested in Australia, yet the TGA approved it on the basis of America's FDA, giving it approval despite the TGA knowing that the FDA did not test it and instead relied on Pfizer's scanty trials that were finished early after thousands of deaths?
Thanks for the question, Senator. And I can honestly say from the bottom of my heart, and I'm surely speaking for a lot of other aviators in the industry, that we have lost complete faith in the Safety Authority in Australia and CASA, and in particular the Primary Medical Officer, Dr. Kate Manderson. And for good reason. It was made available to us a video link that was conducted with Dr. Manderson and several Virgin pilots. In that video link, these pilots were given an opportunity to ask the Primary Medical Officer about the potential side effects and is it safe and has it been tested. We got a copy of that video and we looked at it several times, and the flippancy and the lack of thought that had gone into her answers was palpable. As a result of getting that video, we organised interviews for our media program Club Grubbery with a panel of experts from the USA and Australia in aviation. And two of those people were military aviation medical specialists from the forces in the USA, one from the, I think both were from the Army. These were credible witnesses, and we played them that video. And when they saw the video and responded, one of them said, what would that nurse know about this particular topic? And I said to him, that's not a nurse, that's the Primary Medical Officer for the Civil Aviation Safety Authority. And we were all flabbergasted. Both the medical professionals in America in aviation medicine agreed that this lady was speaking out of the top of her head and didn't know what she was talking about. And that took away the confidence of me and a great many other pilots in the Safety Authority to do the job it's been doing. To me, to be quite honest with you, Senator, it seems to have become an organisation that just ticks the boxes without doing the research. Now, I've lived my whole life under the aviation medical system in Australia. If I had a head cold and I took something like the old Codral cold and flu and I was drug and alcohol tested when I got to work, I'd be grounded and I'd be subject to an investigation because of stringent application of CASA's policy. And when I first realised that there was something wrong with the mandates, and this came about by me actually having a conversation in front of my wife over the phone with one of my base managers in Brisbane for Qantas. And I said to him, I know that we're going to have this vaccine, but don't put me down for AstraZeneca because I'm over 60 and I don't want to run the risk of blood clots. Give me a chance at the Pfizer when it comes out. In other words, I'd accepted that I'd take Pfizer to keep my job. Previously, the week previous to that, I'd given a nursing home permission to give my stepmother Pfizer, having trusted the data that the government was obviously crunching and believing that they were making the decisions in our best interest. My wife overheard me making that comment to my base manager and she said to me, are you going to get vaccinated? And I said, well, yeah, I've got to keep my job. And she said, your whole life is risk-benefit analysis. Have you done any on this? And I said, actually, you're right. I'm just trusting the government. She said, would you trust the government to do the walk around of your aeroplane? I said, no, I wouldn't. And so as a result of that, I went down a very standard route to find out what I could in the next few hours that afternoon about the COVID vaccination policy in this country. I didn't go down rabbit holes. I didn't go exploring the dark web. The first thing I did was go to iView and I asked the question of, I put Four Corners in because I was looking for programs in current affairs programs in Australia that might indicate where we're going with this and what's been done. As a result of that, I went to 2 programs put out by Four Corners. They were both called, I think, Vaccinating Australia. They were about the vaccine rollout policy. And somebody in this august institution had applied through Freedom of Information for the vaccine rollout policy to be given to them, and it was given. And I think it was some 30-something pages with the Health Minister's letterhead on the front. But every page after that was completely redacted. Completely. Nothing. The reporter took that document to Professor Brendan Murphy, handed it to him and said, why is this document fully redacted? And Professor Murphy sat back in his sartorial chair and said, well, you have to realise that we have very sensitive commercial arrangements with our suppliers and they don't want us to talk about it. That was the first thing I saw on Australia's ABC, and that got the hair standing up on the back of my neck. I then decided to contact 3 doctors who I had professional relationships with, GPs. I put the same question to them as I put to CASA and to Qantas Medical not long after that. What are the side effects? Long-term, short-term? Has it been tested at high altitude for people working in aviation? Will I pass my medical every 6 months if I get it? The answer I got from the GPs was, I wouldn't rush into this if I were you, and I'm summarising, but don't tell anyone I told you. And I then said, why wouldn't I tell anyone you told me? Because I can be struck off for telling you that. Now that got the hair on the back of my neck standing up. Then I contacted Qantas Medical and I asked Qantas Medical the question over the phone, can you tell me what all these side effects are? Has it been tested for aviation at high altitude? And will I pass my medical every 6 months? The combined answer to all those questions was, we don't really know, but we're trusting the government. Then I went to CASA, I rang CASA and I asked one of their medical officers the same question and I got the same responses. I then rang one of my management pilots in Sydney and I said, have we changed our safety policy in Australia? And he said, why do you ask? I said, well, for the simple reason that if I was to invent a new jet fuel and decide to fill my Boeing 737 up with that fuel and 200 passengers and take them to Perth from Brisbane, would I be allowed to do that without it being tested? He said, of course not. I said, well, why are you asking us to put an experimental serum into our bodies and put us at the pointy end of that aeroplane and take those people where they need to go? What's happened to our safety policy? His response was, I know where you're going with this, Hoody, but let's just trust the government. Now, I've since learned that that was a fallacy. I can't tell you the dramas that you feel when you're on descent into Perth with 180-odd passengers who just spent 5 hours sitting behind you, to be told by the company radio on your way in that the Premier of WA has just decided to close the borders and you have to tell your passengers that if they want to stay in WA, on landing they'll have to spend 2 weeks in hotel quarantine or they've got to stay in the airport till we fly them home. This was the ludicrous stuff that was going on. So as a result of all those investigations, I realised I could smell a rat in the cheese factory. Something was not being done properly. And I have a background in human factors, which is I used to train pilots in Qantas and also medical teams and military aviation teams that were contracted to do this research or this training with us through Qantas and the former Australian Airlines. And the purpose of human factors is to get pilots to work and crew to work together as a team to solve critical situations. And it's a really good model. And aviation is as safe as it used to be prior to these pandemics because of the learning that we have from experiences. There's a great phrase that is long remembered in the psyche of the people of this generation, and that is, Houston, we have a problem. Everyone knows that saying. It refers to Apollo 13, and Apollo 13 was an accident, was the third lunar mission for landing on the moon. En route to the moon, they had an explosion in their oxygen tanks when they followed a standard operating procedure. As a result of that, the landing on the moon was aborted, and every effort was made to get those astronauts back on Earth. This is where really good human factor and critical management thinking comes into play. Gene Krantz, the controller, the mission controller at Houston, came out straight away and said, we really do have a problem. Our mission is to get these guys back on the ground. What can we do? How can we do it? They focused on what wasn't working, but then somebody said, let's see what we've got that we can bring them home with. What have they got in that capsule that we can use to get them back? So a whole bunch of people were working on one problem, and another bunch of people went and sorted out what they had that they could use to save their lives. Now, in the ideal COVID response would have been a whole bunch of people working on a vaccine that was going to protect people into the future, and then another bunch of people saying, all right, while they're working on that, what have we got in the cupboard that we can use right now to save lives? And so I thought that through when I was making my decision not to get vaccinated. And as a result of that, I looked at people like Dr. Peter McCullough, who is the most written on COVID in the world. He's published, I think, 88 peer-reviewed papers on COVID. He is an expert. He was using off-the-shelf medications that were saving lives. I think he had over 8,000 patients who contracted COVID, and not one of them was hospitalised, to my knowledge. So I looked at the information he was giving, and he was talking about off-patent medicines like ivermectin, like hydroxychloroquine. And I thought, wow, here are these guys, and they're all working really hard to see what we've got in the cupboard that we can use to save people's lives now. Because up till then, Senator, in New South Wales, I knew of a family who had contracted COVID according to a PCR test. They were very unwell. They were at home. They were told to stay home and not present to the hospital unless they were coughing blood or their lips turned blue. When I asked if they were offered any treatment by New South Wales Health, they were given Panadol. Now, why? So the question I had to ask was, OK, well, why aren't we seeing these prophylactic treatments being made available in Australia? And so I could see then that the people offering those prophylactic treatments and the drugs they were suggesting were being cancelled. They were censored. They weren't allowed to share their remedies. They weren't allowed to promote the medications, which are great medications that have been around for decades. And because of their cancellation, I saw the censorship. It became a lay-down misere to me that there's no way that this pandemic rollout was in the best interest of the people. And for that reason, I attended a Zoom call with several hundred aviation people that was organised by somebody else. I appeared on that call. Most of the people were blanked out. You could hear their video, but you couldn't see their faces. And as I listened to their stories of fear about what was being presented to them, because the Prime Minister had just come out and said, we don't mandate vaccines in this country. And then 3 days later, Alan Joyce, the CEO of Qantas, came out and said, if anyone doesn't get vaccinated, they're deciding against a career in aviation. I was enraged by those comments. So then these people were appearing on the screen, page after page after page. And after hearing their stories, I said, I want to see your faces. I said, if we're going into this and we're going to try and resolve this, show your faces. And all these faces came onto the screen. And I was brought to tears because I saw them hurting really badly. Their childhood dreams for careers in aviation were being put up against their desire to have a healthy lifestyle. And they had to make decisions they knew that was going to cost them their careers. And it was at that meeting that I suggested that somebody has to come out and say something to bring attention to this, because this is abjectly wrong. And I realised that I was the oldest and most senior member of that group, and as a result of that, I said I will be the one to fall on my sword. I had a couple of years left in my career. Their careers were only halfway through. I will make an example of this. I'll use myself. And as a result, I made a video that went viral. I believe it had several million views around the world, where I put on my uniform for the last time. I shared my concerns. And following making that video, I was bombarded with 30,000 messages from all around the world in the first week. And the stories were horrendous. People were pouring their hearts out. Doctors who weren't allowed to practice anymore, in tears, telling me, please pray for my patients because I'm no longer able to help them. Messages from people who'd come home and found their 14-year-old daughter hanging in the garage when they pressed the remote to drive their car in, because the girl was perplexed she couldn't go to a formal because Daniel Andrews had locked down Victoria. Stories like this. Now, I could have then, at that stage, decided to, I've done my bit and walk away. But I've always had a heart to serve, as John Larder has, and the people sitting at these panels, that we've always had a heart to serve, and the frontline workers. And we couldn't leave it that way. A lot of people were saying, please keep talking, you've got a voice, please be our voice. And to that end, we've done exactly that. And I can tell you, for the last 15 months, my wife Michelle and I hooked up a caravan over 5 different tours. We toured this country 70,000 kilometres. We visited and spoke at 300 venues around the country to over 30,000 people, and we listened to them. And that's what this government needs to do. There are so many. There is a disadvantaged subclass in Australia now labelled as anti-vaxxers. And I envisage one day that there will be an apology. In 30 or 50 years' time, there will be an apology in this House to people who were mandated into oblivion. And so I've continued to be their voice as best I can. I do the best I can to do that, but I can tell you, and I'll try not to get too emotional as I wind up that part of the question. My wife and I have been touring through a country with a broken heart. This country has been decimated by political expediency and a lack of proper human factor application to a problem that could have easily been solved a whole lot better. I developed an ego warning light in my mind years ago when I became a pilot. I've carried 6 million people over 12 million miles. I've no doubt carried every one of you and everyone listening. I'm sure it's easily possible. I used to come into Canberra all the time. There would have been times when we landed in almost zero visibility fog or in thunderstorms with lightning hitting the ground, and you may have been sitting behind me trusting me. And I apply that problem-solving model to the decisions I've made with this, and I am more convinced now that I made the correct decision. And in the course of our programming, John Larder and myself have run this program called Club Grubbery. We've done hundreds of interviews. We've interviewed Peter McCullough, these are the medical experts, Peter McCullough, Asim Malhotra, Professor Harvey Risch from Harvard University, our own Professor Robert Clancy, who's now been considered for a Nobel Prize, Dr Philip Altman, Dr Pierre Corey, Professor Angus Dalgleish, Professor Ted Steele, and we'll soon be interviewing Dr Sabine Steinberg, and every single one of them has passionately called on governments to stop using mRNA until we sort this out. So my position is basically this. We have a problem. Australia, we have a problem. And when we're in a situation of high anxiety in an aeroplane when there's an issue going on, there's an urgency language that we use if somebody's fixated on a solution that isn't going to work. If, for example, I've got an engine on fire and I'm about to come in and land at Brisbane and I've forgotten something and it's obvious I'm not falling into the normal flow of operational procedures, the minute I hear the term, "Captain, you must listen," I stop straight away. It's trained in me. Stop. What is it? The co-pilot tells me, "We haven't put the landing gear down." Thanks. I'm so solution orientated, I forgot some of the basics. Urgency language. And I urge this Senate and I urge this government with these words: government, you must listen. This country is in dire straits. The spirit of this country has been systematically destroyed, and I've witnessed it firsthand. I've done what many of you don't have the time to do. I've been face to face with people who've lost loved ones that they know were from vaccine injury, and I don't know whether these excess deaths have been caused by vaccines or long COVID or whatever else it might be. It could be an additive in food. I don't know. But nobody else seems to know either, and that's why we must stop. We must investigate, we must do a proper debriefing, we must apply proper human factors, and we must bring the people that I mentioned that have been locked away with censorship back out of the dark with their data so that we can start healing the people of this country. And if we don't do that, we have neglected an opportunity that will go down in history as one of the greatest human factor failures in the world.